Thank you. Is that a newly written song? Wow. It's amazing. Sometimes they write a song for the service, and I'm always so amazed that anyone can do that, that it's even possible, right? So today we are celebrating the final Sunday of our Fall Reflection program. We're also tracking, it's still 2019. We've been very mindful of that. The Fall Reflection program, hopefully you've had opportunity to be in small groups, to get to know other people who are in this community, get to know them a little more deeply, a little more intimately. Hopefully your hearts have been opened, friendships have grown, some ideas have flowered. We will be having our celebration Saturday. That was not part of the announcements, but should have been. What time is our celebration? At 6 o'clock. So whether or not you've been part of a small group, do come to the celebration. And the groups are preparing some way of expressing what they've learned, what they have been inspired to do, to share. So it should be a good time. And we're going to have food again too, so you'll get to eat twice this week. The book we've been studying, and I hear mixed reviews that sometimes it's too hard, and hopefully everyone has learned the art of zooming in on what's meaningful, what speaks to you, and just kind of letting the rest go and knowing that it's okay. I shared last week that I never would have made it through all the graduate years that I did if I didn't know how to pick and choose what I'm focusing on in those books. So the full name is The Book of Secrets, Unlocking the Hidden Dimensions of Your Life by Deepak Chopra. And then each week we've celebrated a different color. This week is gold. Gold is the color of illumination and understanding in the sense of spiritual understanding or wisdom or deeper understanding. And that's one of our goals with this Fall Reflection program, to come away with a deeper understanding. So hopefully that gold that we're wearing today represents that for you. The first week of this program, we talked about the mysteries of life, and then we moved to focusing on the truth of our oneness. Then we talked about freedom and how we achieve this freedom of spirit, freedom of mind. In the following week, the fourth week, we talked about what does it mean to be a spiritual being. You know, we say we are spiritual beings having a human experience. We talked about what that means to be a spiritual being. The fifth week, we talked about consciousness and to be aware and awake and present for our lives, being conscious and a consciousness of the truth of who we are, which led right into the now moment, because that consciousness of who we are happens in the now moment. And then today we're talking about infinite possibilities. There was a story, there was a book actually that I read when I was in school, which was about 100 years ago. And the book was, I think, 2,022 pages long. It felt like it because it was assigned in school and it went on forever. It was a good book, but it was big. And in the book there was stories of how Merlin taught young King Arthur. The name of the book was The Once and Future King. And Merlin taught King Arthur by allowing Arthur to be a fish when he wanted to learn about fish. Or allowing Arthur to be a bird when he wanted to learn about birds. And at one point, Arthur wanted to understand why certain creatures were able to do one thing and another was able to do another. Why deer ran so quickly and swiftly and gracefully. Why eagles soared. Why fish could swim so quickly and easily. And Merlin told him the story and allowed him to see it unfolding. How God, when he created all of the creatures, asked them what they wanted to be, what ability they wanted to demonstrate. So he lined up all of the embryos of the universe, and one by one he asked them. He asked the deer, what is it you want to show up as? And the deer said, I want to be swift and graceful, and God granted that ability. And the eagle said, I want to soar high and powerfully, and God granted that ability. And he went down the line of all these undone or not quite formed beings. And finally, at the end of the line was the little human embryo. And God said to the human being to be, what is it that you want to demonstrate? What ability do you want to show? And the little embryo, and it was the only one that did this, said, I don't know. Every time I think I know what I want to do and be, I get another idea, and then I want to do and be that. And then I get another idea, so I don't know. And God said, then I grant you that you will always be forever potential, forever undone. So what that means is we have the possibility of becoming an infinite amount of things. We have the potential of learning and being so many things, of showing up in so many ways. And I think that's truly a part of what it means to be human, what it means to be a spiritual being having a human experience, because that potential is always there. Sometimes we forget and we think we're stuck behind a wall, but that potential, that ability to tap in to those infinite possibilities is always there. Amit Ray, who is a spiritual teacher from India, said, when everyone else sees walls and barriers, enlightened ones see infinite possibilities. And I'd like to share a story with you about one of our own enlightened ones. He's in the back making sure that you hear me right now. His name is Mike, and Mike has shared a story with me earlier today, and he gave me permission to share it with you. I don't know how many of you know that Mike walks to church every Sunday morning from Fairfield. That's part of his, he lives in Fairfield and he walks to church Sunday mornings. And that's part of his spiritual practice, or he's told me. So when I saw him this morning, I said, how are you? Did you walk to church in those winds? And he said, yes. I mean, we had 30, 32 mile per hour winds, right? So he walked in the dark because there were power outages, and in the wind, and he had a big smile on his face, and he told me it was amazing that it was getting to experience that journey in a completely different way, and that it was an awakening experience for him. So, I mean, the typical cultural default would be, and there was no light, and it was so cold, and it was so windy, and my jacket wasn't keeping me warm. Do you know the type of thing that we do sometimes? Instead of that, this enlightened being saw the possibility of a spiritual experience, of an awakening experience as he walked to church in this amazing wind and dark. That's what it means to be human, to be a spiritual being having a human experience, to feel, to experience the potential, the possibilities in all circumstances. I wish I would have had a camera to take a picture of how his face was lit up, the smile on his face as he was telling me about this. This is what we're talking about, that no matter what, and sometimes that no matter what can be mighty difficult, but no matter what, there are possibilities that we can tap into because we are of God, and with God there are infinite possibilities, always, always. One of the stories in the Bible that teaches us about infinite possibilities is a story of when Jesus and his disciples fed the multitudes. Does everyone know that story? You know, the stories of the Bible sometimes show up in one or maybe two of the Gospels, occasionally three. It's rare that all four Gospels tell the same story, and this is one of the stories that's told in all four Gospels. Bible scholars tell us that that's a sign of the truth of that story, that something like that really happened. It wasn't a metaphor or a teaching story, that really there was an event to back this up. Now I want to give you a little bit of background before I read to you from Matthew chapter 14, verses 13 to 21. That's just a small piece of the scripture. And what I'll be reading is the story of how Jesus and the disciples fed the multitudes. But what led into that, before that happened, Jesus learned that his good friend John the Baptist had been beheaded. So imagine just learning that your close friend has made his transition, and in such a horrible way. And when Jesus learned of that, what he wanted to do was go off and be by himself. He needed some space. He needed time to grieve, to allow that to settle, maybe to pray. And he left on a boat, but the people, the crowds, followed him. And when he saw that happening, that they were there on the beach kind of following the movement of his boat, he came to them, and despite what he was feeling and needing, he ministered to them, he healed the sick, he taught them. And then, of course, the story is about how he fed them. So just imagine the heart opening that was needed for him to do that. Imagine the ability to go deep within him and come from that divine presence. Because on a human level, I don't think it's possible to experience the loss of a friend in that way and then show up for thousands of people. We have to reach into something deep within us, something profoundly true about us to be able to show up like that, and that's what he did. So given that background, this is the reading from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 14, verses 13 to 21. When Jesus heard what had happened, and this is about John the Baptist, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. As the evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." The disciples replied, "We have here only 5 loaves and 2 fish," they answered. Jesus said, "Bring them here to me." And he directed the people to sit down on the grass, taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven. He gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, plus the women and children. So we're talking actually 10,000 plus, right? Theologians discuss and try to come to some sort of resolution. Was this some sort of physically transformative miracle? Did the material fish appear out of sheer potentiality? Did the bread appear out of sheer nothingness? Or maybe as the disciples were passing out the food, others picked up on the generosity and shared what they brought and what they had. And it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, because it's a miracle either way, because out of this sense of lack and limitation, and there's not enough, there came a consciousness and an experience of abundance to overflowing. And it all came out of that living from the heart, living from the Spirit of God that is within us. And out of that there was more than enough for all the people. Right? Deepak Chopra talks about this shift in consciousness as a shift from the local to the non-local. He just had to find big words for moving from everyday lack and limitation to moving to coming from the heart and the soul to the truth of abundance. But what he said about it is the ability to shift from local, that means limited awareness, to non-local awareness is, for me, the meaning of redemption and salvation. And it really fits, because when we move into that non-local consciousness, that consciousness that is not limited by this form, when we move into that consciousness, we are moving into the Christ consciousness, aren't we? And actually what we are doing is moving into the consciousness of the kingdom of heaven. Because Jesus taught us over and over that the kingdom of heaven is within. It is the consciousness we live from. And so when we move from this limited awareness to the awareness of the truth of the kingdom of heaven, isn't that what redemption means? Isn't that what salvation really means? There was a TED Talk, but I didn't get to snip it. The woman's name is Jean Henningsen, and the reason it caught my eye is she titled her talk Infinite Possibilities. And I'm like, oh, wow. And basically what she was saying, she's a coach, a corporate coach. She teaches people how to succeed. And she said, you know, you can use all of the techniques in the world, you can follow all of the steps in the world, and that's great and it's good, and it might be even scientifically backed, but the most powerful tools are first getting out of your head, which is usually the limited and fear consciousness, moving into our hearts, and living and acting from our inner truth. Isn't that exactly the same thing? And this is purely secular coaching, and they discovered the same truth. And then, of course, Mike Dooley is someone we've studied in our book club, and he wrote a book called Infinite Possibilities. And what he had to say is realize that the hows and the whys will all make sense soon enough. Isn't that something that's really, really true? We have a vision and we hold it and we start taking steps toward it sometimes, and then we hit what feels like a barrier. And we get into this headspace of, I don't see how this could possibly happen. And then our vision is dead in the water, right? Can you hear it? I don't see how this could possibly happen. And instead of a vision that we have our heart and soul in, all of a sudden we see a wall, we see impossibility. And so a big piece of this process is surrendering. Surrendering to that power and presence we call God. Trusting that it will lead to our highest good, even when the appearances don't look like it. Isn't that what the Fillmores taught? That we hold the vision despite all appearances. So when we get hung up on needing to know the hows and whys, we can be blocking our good. We have to do what's in front of us to do. But sometimes we don't see how this next step is going to get us to what we're wanting to create. And that's where we have to be comfortable in the uncertainty, trust in the power and presence and infinite wisdom that is God, and just keep doing what's right in front of me to do, and letting go of the hows and whys. I've told this story often of how I ended up at Heidelberg University. You know, as a little girl, I thought I was going to go to college there. It didn't turn out that way. After years of visualizing and knowing that it was going to be true, but when I was told no way, I released it. I didn't add all this grumble energy to it. I just released it. I mean, your parents say you're not going, and you're 16 or whatever, you're not going, you know? Or at least that's how it was when I was growing up. It didn't even occur to me that there was another choice, right? But anyway, so years later, I'm at the Heidelberg University cafeteria. I was traveling at that point and had met some people in Heidelberg and had come back and knew enough that if you knew anything, you went to the cafeteria for dinner. It was the best and cheapest food, and all the people hung out there. So I'm in line Tuesday evening, was my first one. Wednesday evening, someone comes up to me and says, "You're Dalia, right?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "We met at a party a few months ago." He goes, "I wanted to tell you there's a notice for you on the bulletin board." So I walk over to the bulletin board, and the note is from someone else I met at that party, a woman named Anna. And Anna worked as a research associate at Max Planck Institute, and she only had a bachelor's degree in science, which is what I had. And I had said to her in the party what I would give to have a job like yours. Well, the note on the bulletin board said, "Dalia, I heard you're in town. There is a job opening at Heidelberg University's Molecular Genetics Institute. I thought you might be interested. I set up an interview for you. If you want, show up. It's Thursday at 10 a.m. This is Wednesday evening. Thursday at 10 a.m., I go to Heidelberg University's Molecular Genetics Institute, and I got a job. I got a job. They hired me on the spot. And I ended up walking on campus carrying books just like the young people in the postcard. Now, if I had been in charge of the hows and whys, that never would have happened. Never. And I bet if I sat down with each and every one of you, you could tell me a story of a time when you could see no way, and somehow Spirit found a way. So part of our living in this consciousness of infinite possibilities is a willingness to let go, a willingness to be in uncertainty, a willingness to release the hows and whys. I mean, to do what's in front of us, and then let the divine do its work. Eckhart Tolle said that when you become comfortable with uncertainty, infinite possibilities show up in your life. Namaste.